for this session we have Anisa Moosa, the Chief Social Worker at the Islamic Airline, and Shuhaida who is a social worker at the Islamic Airline. Their presentation is going to take us to 3:30 and is effectively giving you an introduction to counselling services. So you most likely won't come out of the session as even lay counsellors with enough skills to be able to do it. Some of you might already have that skill set, but this will sort of be a precursor into what you're looking at and what sort of things you need to explore to build up your own skills in terms of counselling. And of course, counselling is a major skill that you need to have as a leader, either of a group or community or organization. You know, being able to counsel individuals relating to personal or work or any sort of issues is a critically important skill that is part of any leader's toolkit. So without further ado, Shuhaida and Anisa.
Okay, thank you. Let me greet you properly. Okay, good afternoon. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. We begin in the name of Allah, whose grace and guidance we seek in all matters. We're really honored to be addressing you this afternoon, and I sincerely hope that we can just give you a brief introduction to counselling services, because as Mr. Kwaji said, as future leaders in our society, and you currently a crop of thinkers that they're seeking to cultivate, and we're hoping that you go out into the different communities, broadly speaking, across our country, and make a difference and empower our societies to grow into something that we can be really proud of and into a functional country that we've been dreaming about since freedom has come to South Africa. All right. It's just a brief overview of our presentation today. We'll just be discussing a little bit about background, into sort of a broader background into where we are right now, and then we'll go directly into counselling skills. Anisa will be explaining a bit more about counselling, so you'll understand why we're just sort of going to cover it. Okay, when you understand the full nature of the counselling field, you'll understand why we're just going to cover a few of the skills, because it's so broad, it can take you a few years to cover a lot of the background and the theory behind it and that type of a thing. Okay. This way. Okay. You know, if we just sort of start a bit, if we sit back a bit and we look back at the beginning of sort of where we've come from and where we are right now. Obviously, we know since there's been different societies in the world, the North versus South, the East versus the West, in terms of development as well. But, you know, we could look, society sort of held certain views and certain sort of approaches, okay, through the times. From back when, you know, from the dark ages, the enlightened ages, the industrial ages, that type of a thing, right? So we're looking at the past centuries, a lot of it has had sort of an influence to where we are. We know how dynamic and how fluid society is as well, and how society has sort of moved. We're looking at the past centuries. We looked at an ABC model a while ago. We could say that our society, a lot of the aim of our society was using an aggressive approach to gain as much affluence as we can. It was all about production. We need to grow, we need to spread our society, we need to spread our countries, we need to spread our borders, we need to take over. So a lot of it was moving on a very aggressive pace as well. Individually, we had this idea of believe in your individual dreams. I will grow myself, and I am trying to be the best, I suppose, industrialist I can be, the best property owner, everything I can do. Competitiveness as well, it was all about myself and bringing everybody down. I will rise and nobody will rise with me. Okay, so there were a lot of societies in the past that held that. We'd like to think that today, from the 20th to 21st century, we've moved a bit away from that. We're looking at amiability, we're looking at getting along with others, acceptance of diversity, acceptance of cultural diversity. A lot of the times in the past it was all about, I have a certain type of a culture, a certain type of approach, and I'm going to enforce it on other people. And we've moved away from that. 21st century, we are believing in ourselves, we're believing in others as well. When we say we're believing in ourselves, we're believing in the humaneness of ourselves as well, right? That is where we are right now. We are touching a lot on development of a person, the human spirit, we're moving into that as well. Compatibility and creativity, we are it's not just industrialized machinery anymore. It's about humans using human creativity, human thought, human development as well. Okay, so that is sort of the worldview that we're trying to cultivate right now and where we are. How to get there? Getting to such a place where we are right now. We're looking at a people-centered approach. When you are working with people, when you are in the human development field, people-centered approach means simply exactly what it says. People are the center of your focus. People are the center of every sort of approach that you have, every type of project that you have, everything that you're looking to develop, we're looking at it for the benefit of people. When you're working with people, well, I can't stress enough the importance of knowing yourself as a leader and as a community worker. But what is the importance of knowing yourself? Can anyone tell me? Quickly. Yes.
Okay, thank you very much. With leadership, there are certain things that first will begin from an individual in order for them to be actually realized. It takes a person as a vision in order to actually project that vision and make it be seen by others and make others to believe in it. So if a person, if an individual does not know themselves, it is very difficult to say what vision they have to lead, or what vision do they have to lead people towards, or what vision they aspire to lead people towards. So just on that part.
Okay, that's very true.
And also, like as a leader, it's very important to have a strong sense of self, because your sense of self informs your values, and also the things that you think are ethical, which then informs your behavior. Because I mean, I can say that if, for instance, I'm a leader who has a strong sense of self, which informs my value of, let's say, advocating for LGBTI rights in whatever space I'm in, because those are things that I value.
Okay. Knowing yourself, knowing your vision. There's certain questions that you would ask yourself as a person working in the human development field or in a leadership position. Who am I? What is my purpose here? Where am I going with this? What are some of my strengths? What are some of my weaknesses? What do I do that is going to benefit others? What do I do that's going to harm others? Okay, so knowing yourself also allows for a lot of reflection into sort of growing the environment around you, growing people around you as well. Okay, can I shift past this? Okay. Working with other people. What you just said now about knowing yourself, we know it as a skill of self-awareness, okay? So I just covered on the importance of that. I think Anisa will go further into that as well. Working with other people in the human development field also, we're looking at constructive communication. How do we engage with others in a constructive way? How do we be effective in communicating wherever we are in our workplaces, in our community environment, in our volunteer work, whatever the case is? Okay, so that is a skill that some people have it naturally. A lot of others, we have to pick it up. We have to practice it. We have to learn it. Okay, we're going to touch now onto the different types of communication. We're going to touch onto effective communication within the counselling field as well. You'll see why it's not just a case of just speaking from the top of your mind or sharing whatever opinions you have when you want to speak to others as well. Okay. Acceptance of diversity and cultural sensitivity. That's something very important. We know the society we're living in. We're not one type of people. We're not one type of thinkers. Okay? There's so much to us. There's a variety to each person. You may have grown up in the same community, same neighborhood, same religion, same culture, same cultural practices, everything. But there is still a variety to you that is different from that very next person. You could have grown up in the same house with the same family members. There's something different between you and the person who's staying right next to you in the next room as well. Okay, so it's a skill that is something that we need to accept when we're working with other people. Acceptance of diversity and cultural sensitivity. Engaging with other people in a way that is respectful of their background, their beliefs, their values, their morals, their ethics, that type of a thing, all right? So when you're working in this field, well, not necessarily working, when you are engaging with people in the field, you would obviously adopt this approach as well, all right? Okay, there's a quote there that's something very important. I think you may have heard of it before. Learn to be a follower before you become a leader. All right. Let me get into our actual organization. We're going to give you some pamphlets so you can have a look at it a little later when we're done talking. Islamic Airline is essentially a counseling service. We provide confidential counseling services to the community of Johannesburg and actually beyond, right? We do face-to-face counseling and we also do telephonic counseling, so that allows us to have a national sort of footprint in the South African community as well. It started off back in 1992 under the Jamiyat Ulama South Africa with their support and with their encouragement. Our director, she was working in another organization at that time, right? And she was a counselor, and she realized that there was a strong need for counseling within the Muslim community, especially for women. A lot of women were going through many different psychosocial issues at the time, and either they didn't know who to go to, or they would approach other organizations which they felt were perhaps not were not able to relate to them as Muslim women in the community. So she realized the need to start up some type of an organization that would address this need at the time. She approached the Jamiyat came on board, very humble beginnings. I think it was one phone line, one office, and about 3 counselors. And today we've grown tremendously, actually. We have over 15 volunteer counselors. We have 6 full-time staff members. We provide training for all our counselors, so they are up to date with the latest developments within the counseling field, within the human development field as well. We are registered with the Department of Social Development, so the standards that we conduct our organization with are on par with national development standards as well. If you look at some of our monthly statistics, we see plus minus 180 cases, up to 200 cases a month. We cover different areas of counseling. We look at families, individuals, marital, with children. We do a lot of play therapy. It's a professional approach of working with children as well. So this is a service that we offer throughout. Anyone is welcome. We are accepting of any faith, anyone in the community as well. Okay, we have a welfare component, a feeding scheme essentially, and plus minus 1,000 people a month we reach out to per month. Some of the service interventions that we do, something new that we're touching on is the employee wellness program. Look, in terms of how society is changing and the needs of corporate communities as well are coming to the front. We're trying to meet that need as well. We offer quite a comprehensive employee wellness program where we would go into companies, we would go into organizations, and we would offer either individual counseling. We do group work addressing maybe social concerns that the entire staff component would have. We can offer team building, we can offer management development as well, right? We do life skills programs. We would go out into the field. We would go to wherever the need is. We can go into schools, we can go into communities and offer different types of life skills as well. Econometric assessments, these are professional assessments that we offer our clients. Looking at careers, we're looking at personality assessments, stress management, that type of thing. It's something very comprehensive, and we do full feedback afterwards. So it's not something that we would just do a test and we would leave you hanging with, all right? Okay, I touched on the employee wellness program. One of the recent things we've been looking at is youth development. Youth development last year, we started a project in conjunction with the city of Joburg where we took a group of unemployed youth and we tried to sort of develop them to a point where they would gain the skills needed to gain employment. So we empowered them basically with things like CV writing, interview skills, communication skills, professionalism in the workplace, self-confidence, self-esteem, growing, that type of a thing. And I'm happy to say that at the end of that, there were approximately about 20 young men. It was mostly young men. 20 young men who were able to gain employment, and 4 of them were able to sort of start up their own business using the entrepreneurship skills that we sort of developed with them over that 3-month program. And that was at last year's program. So that's something that we want to focus on as well. That's just an overview of Islamic Airline. If I can hand over to Anisa, she'll just go now specifically into the counselling field itself. Okay, thank you.
Assalamu alaikum, everybody. Good afternoon. Okay, Shuhaida, as I already said. My name is Anisa. I'm the Chief Social Worker at the Islamic Airline. I think because we're so limited with time, I'm going to go straight into the purpose of our presentation this afternoon, right? I believe that early in the program, the need for counseling skills was identified. I'm not exactly sure what the context was, right? But I'm just going to say that counseling is something that is a skill and a function that not everybody can fulfill, right? And I know that the concept of counseling, even the word social worker, there's misconceptions about what social workers do and whether there is a qualification. And yes, there's definitely a qualification involved. I think people associate it with doing voluntary work and doing informal work for the community, right? It is a specialized field, including counseling, and it's a lot more intense than one realizes. It's more than just providing support. And therefore, when we do basic counseling skills training, please bear in mind that this is a crash course in counseling. It's a 40-hour training, there's practicals required, and after the practicals are complete, that's when we issue certificates, right? But just then going back to basics, so I'm going to ask you what anyone can contribute, right? What is your understanding of counseling? What is your understanding of counseling?
I think my understanding of counselling is informed by the fact that I've done psychology throughout my undergrad and honours. So my understanding is informed by the fact that it needs to be participatory. So if I'm speaking to somebody and they have an issue that they are struggling with, my role is not to be omniscient. My role is not to be a messiah. My role is to have a reciprocal conversation and then we come to a solution together. Because I feel that sometimes how people approach counseling is in a very disempowering way. We assume that the person is unable to conceptualize their own solution. I feel like most of the time, 98% of the time, people know what they should do. They just need to hear from another person, or they need those beliefs of their solutions to be reaffirmed. So I think, in my opinion, as if I were to be in a counseling role, it would be as auxiliary or as supportive or in a participative or reciprocal.
You're looking for the word facilitator.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Pretty much like Dee, my idea is influenced by the idea that I'm a psychology graduate. And for me, my understanding of counseling, and at least this is more understanding I got within the extra work than I had to do to boost the curriculum, is a client gets into a space where there's no definition. Okay. And the client redefines everything. And basically, so when a client gets into a counseling room, it's up to the client to determine how far they are willing to share their narrative with you. And all you become is just like a guide into maybe channeling, using the mechanisms that psychology teaches you to just to open them up to what more issues you feel like they could add into the counseling session. So yeah, it's an open space that has no definition.
Okay, so can I just check? You've got counseling experience?
Yes.
Okay, so you are practicing counselor?
No, I don't practice.
Okay, and you've completed your master's?
Yeah. No. So I have not completed my master's, but I've got a peer counseling certificate. I've completed an undergrad in psychology.
Okay. All right. Okay, so at least then I know who I'm speaking to, right? In the kind of dynamics that we're dealing with, right? So let's go into then the definition of counseling, right? And just by the way, I don't take, like even as placement students, I take social work students, but I don't take psych students because they don't have, unless you've done some kind of supplementary or complementary course or now they've come up, since I've done it, they've come up with a lot of other qualifications that you can get, like a year's course in lay counseling or 2 years and that kind of thing. But psych students, as they are, we don't take them on to do their practical placements at the care line because I can't put them in sessions. Okay, but I would take social work students. Okay, so if we look at the definition of counselling, okay, is that one? I missed one.
Yeah.
Okay, so just generally speaking, counselling is not advice giving. Okay. And it is the technique to help people to make an informed decision in order to discover themselves and to be able to cope with life and themselves. And if you look at this definition, it entails a few aspects. Okay, so the one aspect is that it's a process by which people make decisions. Okay. Secondly, it's a process by which people do self-discovery. And we spoke about self-awareness, but I think a little earlier when Shuhaida was speaking, there was a focus around leadership. And aside from leadership, any individual requires a level of self-awareness because with it, you can do a whole lot more. And what we're striving towards is what we call self-actualization. You want to live to your potential. And you can't improve, you can't change, you can't reflect, you can't take stock, you can't build self-confidence, you can't goal set, you can't decision make, you can't build self-acceptance and self-esteem without self-awareness. Does that make sense? Right? Because first I need to be conscious of who I am, right? With my growth areas and with my strengths. Then only can I reflect. Then only can I self-define. Then only, and I always, when we talk about self-confidence, for me it's like this. If I present on a topic that I don't know well, what am I going to do? What am I going to do? You're going to see, right? I'm going to fumble, I'm going to stall, I'm going to look down. But when I'm presenting on a topic I know, you'll see it because of my confidence on the topic. The same with self-awareness. A person who lacks self-awareness is self-conscious, right? They become nervous, they become anxious, they have what we call low self-esteem, okay? That all stemming from the fact that the self-awareness is lacking, right? But what we're also saying is then through that we build self-acceptance and self-esteem. And that is why self-awareness on any individual level, aside from your role as a leader or a community developer, or whatever the case may be, has to start from the individual. And then again, if you look at counseling, it is an individual process. You can't do counseling in group settings. Okay? Yes, you get support groups, you get community development that you address a common issue, right? But it doesn't resolve individual issues that require its own attention. Okay. So we looked at discovering oneself and also then instilling coping mechanisms. So whatever may be the reason that brings the person to the counseling setting, you would help the person to develop their coping mechanisms. Ones that they may have or may not have, that you'll assist them to identify. Okay, so again, like the lady at the back mentioned, it's very participatory. It's a very person-centered. And a lot of people, because of their misunderstanding or misconception of what counseling is, a lot of it stems from the idea that counseling is about giving advice, right? And really speaking, can you really expect a stranger to tell you what the solutions of your life is when they don't know much about it, realistically speaking, firstly? Secondly, usually problem situations, like, okay, we get a lot of maritals, right? And from the maritals, you'll get, let's say, for example, substance abuse, or you'll get unemployment, or you'll get a breakdown in communication, a whole lot of issues, right? Now, the expectation is that a 15-year marriage, you can imagine now the issues that have snowballed in 15 years. Now, walk into a counseling room and expect one stranger in 1 hour to unravel and explain to me how all those problems are going to be solved, right? So what we're moving towards then is a process. Counseling is a process, and it's a process that requires lots and lots of responsibility from the client. It's an individual responsibility, but the counseling process is also a relationship. It's a relationship based on mutual responsibility, like any other relationship, right? Is based on mutual responsibility. So the counselor has the responsibility to implement skills. So it's a trained person. Okay, and I emphasize these things because I don't know about the other communities, but in our community, counseling is becoming a buzzword. For some reason, everybody wants to counsel and everybody thinks that they can listen very well. Okay, but it's a skilled profession. It's not an unskilled profession, and therefore people need to be trained. So it's a relationship between a trained person and a client. So the trained person obviously has the responsibility to apply themselves effectively and to take responsibility for their part in the process. The client's responsibility then is to also take responsibility for their part, and then obviously implementation of the changes, not just what's in the session but outside of the session, right? Okay, so I think so everybody's clear on what counseling is. Not yet, we look at the aims, but you have a general sense of what it is, right? Okay, so in a little bit more detail, what is counseling? Now, counseling implies a purposeful discussion or a series of discussions with a person in need of assistance for experience with which he is no longer able to cope with on his own. So the person reaches the point where they decide, okay, I can't do this on my own and I need professional help. Is competently supporting such a person through a warm, caring and understanding attitude. Now there we talk about conditions for facilitation. Okay, your conditions for facilitation is the actual environment within which the counseling happens. So I can't go and counsel somebody who approaches me in a public space and says, you know what, I've got this problem, I need to speak to you. And why I bring this up is because we get a lot of religious leaders, people go to their beauticians, to their hairdressers, to their reflexologists, and they offload. Okay, you talk about your problems, but that's not the platform in which we do counseling. Counseling is confined to a certain space. It's a controlled environment. Okay, so obviously there's ethics that goes with that, and there's boundaries that goes with that relationship. And therefore, the person who is a counselor is a neutral person, which means that it then prevents any kind of bias or personal opinions about what the person is going through. And this, again, I'll mention specifically in this context because when you're working in communities where there's familiarity, that becomes problematic, okay? Because people know each other, right? So if I'm in, let's say, any residential area, for example, and you find that neighbors know each other, family members know each other, and so it compromises not only confidentiality but the boundaries of that relationship. Okay, then it strives towards independent functioning of the individual. So we talk about independent. Now, I think from the discussion that I heard from Maulana Bam and even Shuhaida, we address certain things on a collective level, like certain groups. Okay, but like I said, individual counseling, except for family counseling and group joint counseling between two or more people, is an individual process. Okay, so it is a purposeful relationship between two or more people which facilitating conditions are created and developed. I mentioned the facilitating conditions, but what they really are is the setting. So it's based on my counseling values. So if I provide support, if I listen attentively, if I show warmth and genuineness, if I care genuinely for the person, right, then I'm creating the right atmosphere and environment for the person to feel safe enough to disclose. And obviously that's associated with trust. Okay? Alright, then it involves the application of effective communication skills by a trained person. It attempts to bring about positive changes in the perceptions, attitudes, feelings, thoughts, and behavior of the client. So can you see we're looking towards positive change? And remember that in counseling, what we're actually saying is, I can't change my environment because I don't have control over it. But what can I change? What can I change? I can change me because that's what I have control over, right? So I don't have control in any relationship. I don't have control over the other person's behavior. I don't have control over the environment directly, but I do have control over my response to it, my approach to it, my perceptions and thoughts about it, my attitude towards it. Okay, so that's where the change comes. It's an individual change and comes from here. It doesn't come from outside of us. Okay, so it enables the client to achieve these changes by means of specific skills. It is the helping of the client to help him or herself. So we spoke about empowerment, right? The counselor does not. So when a client walks in, I don't say, how can I help you? I'll say, tell me why you're here. And the difference is simple. Okay, I am not taking the responsibility for solving this person's problems. I am empowering them to take charge and take control of their own life. And often when clients come to us, they're at a very low place, because if they're experiencing something for a very long time, they start self-doubting, they start questioning, they start losing faith in their own ability to deal with their issues themselves. So more often than not, when people have decided that they need professional help, there is more often, like I said, almost always, the element of low self-esteem for whatever reason, and mostly that self-doubt. And that is why it's so hard for them to make the decisions, because they know they're leaning in a certain direction, but because they don't have the confidence to take the step, they need someone else to endorse it. And by you saying that, you know what, we say, I'm not here to help you. Obviously, I would say this to the client, but the principle behind counseling is that I'm not here to help you. I'm here to help you to help yourself. Okay, so the word responsibility for me is a big one, okay, when we work with clients. So it starts from the very, very beginning. To what extent is a client committed to the process? And in the context that we work, often you'll get people who come for sessions or they won't come for sessions. Remember that also it's based on this misconception that counseling is about the counselor telling me what the solutions are, and then I go for the first session and I realize, no, it's not so easy. No one's going to tell me what the answers to my problems are. I have to figure it out myself. So you know what, I'd rather just stay where I'm at. It's so, I know we talk about the comfort zone, and I always call it the uncomfortable comfort zone, because they're miserable sometimes. But it's harder for them to think about the change or the unknown, to make that effort. So I rather just stay the way things are. It's not so bad, unless something catalyzes it. Okay, and then you still get people in crisis. So go to the counselor when they're in crisis, and then when they feel, you know what, it's not so bad now, they abandon the process until it's bad again, like bad enough. Okay, all right. So it allows for the empowerment of the client by identifying and encouraging the use of previously unused potential. So you remember that counseling is based on the belief in human development. You can't be a counselor without believing that people can grow, right? So you have to believe in human development and human growth. And so it is with that belief that we know that each human being has potential. Every person is unique, they have different potentials, different talents, different abilities, different skills. But the belief in the human ability is there. And so it is our job to enable and facilitate that process by which people start to activate their unused potential. Okay? All right. Then in accessing and linking support systems, okay, so counseling is also about accessing and linking support systems and other resources, especially when you're working in the non-government sector, you're working in NGOs, because you're connected and you network with other organizations, you're able to link resources to the community. Then it helps in the fulfillment of the client's needs. Remember that when clients come, they have an expectation and they have needs. It may be personal, like needs like simply support, someone to listen to me, or they have a need to make a decision. So you always are conscious of what the client's need is when they come in, okay? And it may include the giving of relevant information. So it's related to linking resources, okay? You can stop me if you have any questions, or must we leave questions for last? For last. Okay, so the aims of counseling is to build a relationship of trust, honesty, and openness. Again, elements of any relationship. And you know, interestingly enough, it may seem basic, but like I said, when people come to you, sometimes this is lacking in their own relationships. And that is why clients find the support in a counseling session, because they're not getting this in their own lives, right? Then modeling positive behavior to allow people to bring about meaningful change in their lives. Now, when we talk about modeling, it sounds like a high expectation. But through using certain techniques and demonstrating how one can communicate effectively. Not because I'm there teaching them and say you need to use this language and you need to speak like this, but the fact that you can reflect, and the fact that you can listen attentively, and the fact that you can clarify, what are you doing? Indirectly, the person is developing ways. Also, we give them different activities. Sometimes we call it homework, and we give them something to do at home to bring back. It's what we call experiential work, right? Anyone familiar with the concept of experiential work? Okay, so the lady that was sitting there at the back is not here, but she mentioned the word She mentioned the word participatory. Okay, so they're participating in the process, but you're using their experiences outside the session to help them to reflect and apply on what they're doing in the session. Okay, then listening to what people say so that we can reflect on them, not only to what we hear, but also what we sense. Now be careful with this because we don't do analytical work. But I can't emphasize to you the importance of the skill of listening. That forms the foundation of the work that we do. And people take that very, very lightly. Okay? Okay.
So I did have a question. I was going to leave it to the end, but I think
why it's
kind of
relevant
now.
Okay.
Yeah. So I think that what you're presenting as counseling is very professional, and I can definitely see the benefit that it has. But I can also think of people who just need someone to offload with. And when you present them with all of this, then it's not actually what they need, and in fact it becomes more burdensome. So is there something between, talking to your hairdresser and counseling where people can access a space that...
Okay, so I'm hoping, if time permits, I'm going to give you a few basic skills that you can use, right? But remember what I spoke about. I said client need. So if the client's need is simply to be listened to and to get support, then that's fine. We get clients who come the first time and they may not come again because sometimes you listen to yourself and you figure out something. It's like when you really listen to yourself. So if the counselor is effective in what they're doing and they're reflecting and paraphrasing, then by talking to someone the first time, your need to offload, your need to be heard, let's say your need for support are fulfilled, then that's fine. Okay, so that's why counselors may say, okay, you know what, I didn't help the client. They didn't come back. But remember, it's not about you, it's about the client. And sometimes we as counselors have the need to know that we've made a difference. So it's not necessarily clear cut, right? So if the need was met, then obviously you'll work with where the person is at. Okay.
After you finish, no problem.
Okay, I'm done. Does that answer your question? Okay, but remember that different people's expectations are different for the process. It's like problem solving. If I have a certain problem and I address it and I'm satisfied with the outcome I have now, or I can say, no, I want a better outcome. So let's say, okay, let's talk about family dynamics, and we say, okay, my relationship with my sister-in-law is amicable and I'm satisfied with that in terms of problem management, and that's fine. But if I want more than that, if I want a relationship based on all the, let's say we'll call it frills, right? And I say, no, I don't want just an amicable relationship with my sister-in-law. I want us to be like sisters. I want us to be like friends. So then obviously the need will be different. So you'll work with what the client's need is. Even when we talk about self-actualization, you can only work with what the person wants for themselves. Counseling is not what I want for my client, it's what the client wants for themselves. Does anyone know Maslow's hierarchy of needs? Mm-hmm. Okay, so if you know Maslow, then you know that it's about a hierarchy of needs. So if my basic needs are met, we'll get people who need material assistance. And obviously therapeutic work is not a priority for them. They won't come back because they don't know where they're going to get their next meal from. So even if we say, let's say, especially, you get the asylum seekers, the refugees, they've experienced huge trauma. But because they're so poverty stricken, that's their priority. So even though they could benefit from therapeutic work, they're not going to come for a counseling session because that's not where their focus is. Okay? So I don't know if that sums it up. Did you have something else to ask?
No, I have something different from the answer.
Okay, do you want to leave it for the end or do you want to ask? You can if you want. Okay. All right, then accepting people for who they are and not for what we want them to be. Okay, so that's what I mentioned. Also about acceptance, right? And maybe just linking to what Mulana Palm said a bit earlier. In the counseling field, we talk about accepting the person and not necessarily their actions. There's a lot of things but it's not about us. When we're counseling, it's not about us at all. And it's not about their actions, it's about who they are. At the end, they make the decision. So we may approve or we may not approve, we may agree, we may not agree, but that's besides the point. It's not about us. Everything that we do as a counselor is based on the client's frame of reference and not ours. Okay? Alright, then restoring capabilities for solving their own problems. Like I said, everybody has coping mechanisms. There's no person without coping mechanisms. All you're doing is you're trying to access those. Okay? To help people make informed decisions. Okay, so let's go one step further. Okay, any questions about what counseling is and its purpose, its functions, its aims?
Just like a quick question on the acceptance part. Because I mean, like, for me it's a bit tricky because, I mean, if I go into a counseling space, then my expectation is that you're going to accept me unconditionally. That you're not gonna, or I'm not going to at least feel that there are certain aspects of who I am which aren't acceptable. I want to go in there and I want to feel that I'm in an unconditionally accepting space, which then helps the process of therapy, the process of counseling even better, because I mean, if that is the case, then I can always go to a family member or a friend. But the assumption by going to a counselor is that I'm going to an impartial stranger, an impartial and objective stranger who's going to accept me unconditionally, which then makes it easier for me to speak about even my deepest, darkest problems, because I know that I'm dealing with someone who's not only professionally skilled, but who's skilled with the empathy of understanding that I need to accept this person unconditionally.
Right. Okay, is the question?
Yeah, I'm just understanding.
Okay.
I'm trying to understand how you reconcile, because you spoke of conditional acceptance.
I spoke about unconditional. We spoke about accepting somebody. No. Oh, you're talking about the differentiation between behavior and person.
Yeah.
Okay, but we not. The issue is we accept the person irrespective of what their actions are. So it's not acceptance based on what they did or what they said.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay, so I'm separating behavior from person.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Yeah. Got it.
Okay.
Maybe just a follow up to Dean. My understanding would be people are not compartments, right? So I mean, in as much as I would have a counselling certificate and some sort of maintain a position of impartiality, lack of a better term, but my lived experience will inform how I will pose questions. It will inform also how much information I want to access. So I mean, for me, I feel like maybe there is nothing like being impartial, right? And which is maybe, I mean, you just said now, you accept people for who they are and not what you want them to be. But I mean, I feel like there's always an underlying dread of wanting people to be a certain way, which is why then you will pose certain questions. Maybe again, that's.
But you need to understand one thing, that from the beginning, it's not about you. Okay. If you can understand that counseling is not about you, look, we as human beings, our brains are processing all the time. Okay, we have our own values, our own opinions, our own belief systems, our own experiences, which influence our thinking. That goes without saying. But what we're saying is that in a counseling setting, it's not about you. So you remove that part. The only thing you're doing is you listening to what the person is saying, and you're reflecting from their frame of reference. So I suppose also, depending on your training and what theoretical approach you're using, I'm strictly person-centered. I'm Rogers. Okay, so from Rogers' point of view, the only thing that's relevant is my ability to put myself in the client's frame of reference. And the only time I would step out of that is when I'm addressing an issue that's directly related to the counseling relationship and to the counseling process. So my opinions and my values and my thoughts and all of that has no place in the counseling setting. Because all I'm doing, you see, we don't have enough time to do a full training. If I had that time, then obviously we could elaborate and I can show you exactly the extent of empathy, because empathy is not a skill. What is it? It's a way of being, in a way, because that's the person-centered approach. All those basic skills are the foundation with which you communicate with your client. So I know what you're saying. Yes, we are human beings. We have brains, and in our brain is processing everything about us. But that's something I can sit there in front of my client and I can think whatever I want to about that person. But when I communicate to that person, it's not my place to show them judgment, to respond in any way that's going to make them feel as though they're being judged. And that comes with experience. The ability to be fully objective. Okay? But we obviously we don't have the time to go in more detail, but I can demonstrate it to you very easily. Okay. All right, we had one and then two. Okay, let me take it while we're on the topic first.
For me, I see a pattern in what the questions are, and I think it's more concerning. Sorry, my voice is bad.
No, it's fine.
So I think it's concerning more with the advice part, and like how you started that people go to hairdressers and to different places to offload, like what Aslam was saying, offload your feelings. And the question I'm asking you is, do you give advice? You guys don't. I think that's what we us as humans need
To understand.
We need,
are you saying that's what people need? They need advice.
We need advice, and I think that's why we go talk to people to offload, and then we depend on advice. This is what I think is best, and maybe this is the best way.
Okay, I'm going to come to you, but I'm just going to address what you're saying quickly, right?
And for me, I feel like you were saying, and she was saying earlier on, that it's not skilled. It's something that you need to do professionally and trained. But I feel it's something that's skilled. You get people that you can just speak to, and they'll really give you the best advice. And people that are like what Mawetu was saying, it's life experiences. That's the best advice that you can get. And I think that's the reason why, like speaking from a refugee perspective, that's why a lot of our people don't go really for counselling a lot. It's not because we're poverty stricken, because we're not poverty stricken. I think it's more to do with we want advice, proper advice, and not just somebody to listen to and it's over and done.
Okay, so what is proper advice and where does it come from? Whose perception is advice based? Yeah.
Okay, so for me, proper advice is somebody who has experience in something that you're speaking about. Somebody that can listen to you and be like what she likes to do. I'm sorry for like she asks questions and like interrogate how do you really feel about it, and telling you, Sophie, this is who you are, don't you think, and isn't this the best way? And she still leaves that decision to you.
Okay. So let's say, for example, you go to somebody now as a counselor, right? If I'm a counselor, then I may have had experience with divorce, but not necessarily grief. Or I may have had with a crime, trauma, but I haven't had with death, for example, right? Or whatever the case may be. So no counselor, chances are, okay, maybe you do get people who've experienced a whole range of social problems, like substance abuse, like any behavior addiction, whatever the case may be, right? But more likely than not, you're not going to get somebody who is experienced in all social problems, right? That's the one thing. The second thing, if you look at one of the fundamental principles of counseling, is that we believe in the uniqueness of every individual. The individuality is a counseling principle, right? Individualization. So everybody's experience of an encounter is different. So I could have gone through, okay, so let's say two people went through losing a child, right? Two people lost a child. And they lost them at approximately the same developmental stage. They were in a similar developmental stage. Their children were of similar ages. But the experiences may have been different because of a number of other influencing factors, right? I'll give you another example. Just recently, okay, so if you look at terminal illness, for example, right? and you get somebody who was diagnosed at a certain stage, and you get somebody else who's diagnosed at another stage. The one recovered and the other one didn't recover. And the one speaks of all their experiences through every stage of the disease. But they cannot, can they, and I sit there, let's say for example, and I got worse. And then I'm listening to this person and how they recovered and how they went through the different phases and how they, so I'm like sitting there and I don't feel like, although this person experienced a similar illness as I did, but I'm not finding that point of connection with them because the experience is so different. So what I'm saying to you, take maritals for example, and the Mulana sitting at the back will will vouch for me. So I go and tell the woman, give him an ultimatum, he needs to know what he's going to lose. Okay. And then she comes back and she says, you know what, he told me to pack up my things and leave. It may have worked for me. Maybe I gave my husband an ultimatum and I told him, I said, okay, fine, you either do this, or I'm leaving. And he, shame, the poor guy decided, okay, fine, now if I don't do what she says, she's going to leave. I'm just giving you, and maybe I'm making a little bit light of it, but what I'm trying to demonstrate to you is everything, different things work for different people. And I think the value of individualization is something, again, you cannot underestimate. And the risk with advice giving is then the response. Remember what we spoke about? We spoke about the words empowerment. We spoke about the words responsibility. So then who takes the responsibility for the advice, right? And then if we give advice, then it's what we call a quick fix. I remember my lecturer once told us, she said, if counseling was about advice giving, then every person could give advice based on their own experiences and their own thoughts and their own ideas. And we'd even have a website where you could punch in your problem and you'd get a solution or possible solution. So what I'm saying is when we talk about counseling in the true sense, we're talking about counseling that has the elements of self-growth. And then Aslam also asks, is there something in between? Yes, you get things like, okay, life coaching is a little bit more goal-orientated, life goal-orientated. So if I want to achieve certain things, it's more shorter. Mediation is even more shorter. So mediation is where two people come more around conflict resolution and more about coming to agreements about certain things. So you do get the short-term processes, but if you talk about counseling in the true sense is a process. So it depends what your need is in terms of the setting here that we are and what it is, what role do you want to play. And I always say when I do training, right, when people come into the basic counseling skills training, I always say to them that when someone comes to you with their problem, the first thing you need to ask them is what is their expectation of you. Because with the Molanas, let's say for the religious leaders, and they go to the mosque, and as they're coming out, someone comes to them and they say, you know what, I have to speak to you, I've got this problem and I've got that problem on the side. It happens quite often, right? Then they need to ask themselves, or they need to ask the client, in what capacity do you want me to intervene? Am I there as a religious leader? Am I there as a counselor? Am I there as a family friend or a family member? Because how you approach it will depend on what role you're assuming. So if, let's say, for example, you an alternate healer or you a health professional and someone offloads, or you're a hairdresser or you're a beautician, whatever the case may be, you're not a trained counselor. So your intervention will not be the same as that of a counselor or as a therapist. It will be there. You'll be there to give support. And the skills that I can talk about now are the ones that will just give you basic tools on how to respond to them. But it's not going to allow you to complete the counseling process. Does that answer your question? Right? So that is why I say when people do counseling, they have this very basic idea of what counseling is. They don't have a full understanding of what it entails. Those of you who are doing therapeutic work will know exactly how in-depth it can be. And there's a number of techniques. They're doing all kinds of things to it.
I also have undergraduate in psychology. And for me, I'm not underestimating the power of counseling in psychologists and social workers. But for me, the fact that you guys underestimated the power of lived experience for me was a little bit problematic, because you guys were you have to be skilled or trained to give advice or for somebody to speak to and stuff like that.
Lived experience has a place and skills have a place, right? I always say it doesn't mean that you've been through a number of diseases, it qualifies you to be a doctor. In the same way, you have to respect the profession of counseling. It is a skilled field, right? And there's a lot of ethical considerations to go with it. It's a sensitive field. People trust you with their lives. You need to understand confidentiality. Now, confidentiality is an ethic, again, that people do not fully understand. Okay? There's no such a thing, for example, as absolute confidentiality. And I'm just giving you an example, and why I'm saying that is because, like any other field, there has to be a code of ethics that goes with it. It is a profession, and not anyone can do it. That is why it is a profession. So, skill, yes, you need it. Training, yes, you need it. Not anybody can. But life experiences definitely help you. I'll tell you why. I may not have experience, let's say, for example, the loss of a child, for example. But let's say I have experienced death. So I can identify with someone around feelings of loss, around grief, around feeling helpless. Okay? So those are the kind of things that life experience add to my ability to be an effective counselor. Life experience may give me life skills. They may change my outlook on life. They may make it broader. And that's what enhances your work. But that's not to say that if I have life experiences alone, that I can train, that I can counsel. Does that make sense? It goes together. Life experiences on its own does not give you the ability to do therapeutic work. Right? Does it clarify a few things for you?
Okay, thank you very much. My question is quite an odd one, and the statement made by my brother on the right actually makes it more interesting, where he speaks about the situation in between the hairdresser and a professional counselor.
Okay, sorry, the difference between a professional counselor and a?
Okay, I'm saying in between them.
Okay, yes, an intervention that's in between the two.
To my closest understanding, probably the space between that, or the individuals between that, is probably community leaders, probably religious leaders, probably even close friends and close relatives, right? Where people will somehow offload to, or maybe go to and consult. And also your explanation of the dynamics of an individual, the uniqueness of the individual experience, where you indicated that each and every person, what might be a solution for that person may not be a solution for another. So this is where my question comes to, in a sense that now, let's say the client or the person whom is being, the person who has a problem, or the problem, the client is a professional counselor himself, and you, the person in between, the two extremes, is probably a friend or a community leader or a religious leader. How do you deal with a situation where a counselor comes to you and they have a problem, where you need to actually, do you assume that you are now there, you are just listening, and you are almost like, okay, I'm just going to listen to, just going to be hearing. And
okay.
Also, when you are a professional counselor and this client is a counselor himself, what happens then? Do you need to be creative because they almost look like they know it's like they know the answers. They know, I don't know if maybe. So how do you deal with a professional counselor who comes as a client? Okay,
so I'm not sure if I understood you correctly, right? But in the first instance, please remember that when we talk about giving support, and you spoke about the points between a professional counselor and a friend and all of that. a friend and a religious leader and all of that is not the middle grounds that we were talking about. We were speaking about trained mediator, and we were talking about somebody who will give life coaching and that, right? So those are also professionals. But I also want you to understand, like each one of you are young leaders or aspiring young leaders, right? If you have a certain profession, do not underestimate the fact that counseling is a profession. It's not something that families and friends can do. It is a skilled profession, right? As far as peers counseling one another, it depends on whether they know one another, right? So they shouldn't know one another because the element of objectivity has to be present, right? But you can't treat yourself. So again, you know how we say it doesn't mean that if you're a dentist you don't get a toothache. So you can go and see another dentist, but that doesn't mean that you're going to be able to remove your tooth yourself or that you're going to know what the doctor is going to do. Remember that sometimes, because we may be, let's say I'm going through something that's quite traumatic for me, okay? I don't think that someone who's going through something problematic like that has the ability to consciously treat themselves like a client and say, okay, I'm switching roles. So I sit in client role and then I sit in counselor role and then I say, okay, fine, I'm supposed to be able to do this, because you can use your experience as a counselor to say, you know, it's like a doctor will say, okay, fine, I know about healthy eating, I know about how to administer medication, I know. So within your capacity, you've learned certain things about, let's say, having a positive attitude, or taking the time to step back and reflect, or not rushing into a decision. But almost always, even a counselor needs to know their limitations. Whether you're dealing with a client or you're dealing with your own issues, one of the key factors or one of the key strengths of a counselor is to know their limitations and to know your capacity. Again, we speak about boundaries. So if I am going through something difficult, the point that I get to when I realize that I can't cope on my own, then I need to acknowledge that and I need to get the help. And a trained counselor should be able to identify that point sooner than somebody else. Does that answer your question? It's about knowing when you need something, right? And again, to answer your question, people's approaches are different. So my counseling style and Shuhaida's counseling style might be different. Her strengths, the techniques that she uses, sometimes just speaking to her, like you said, some people may just need the support, someone to listen to you so that you can reflect. I can't do it myself, so I may need to speak to somebody. Even counselors, I'm going to come to you now, right? When we do counseling, a requirement for counseling is supervision. I'm going to round up now, right? We obviously can't go further. I had a lot more planned, but we don't have the time, right? But what's compulsory for counselors is supervision and debriefing, right? So you de-roll and you get supervision from another professional, whether it be a senior or it be a colleague, right? And so even when counselors go into session, they start realizing that something is too close to home. I'm seeing a client and I can almost identify with them, or it's bringing back memories of a similar experience for me. Then I need to do debriefing and I need to ask myself, can I continue with this case, or is it something I need to refer? So what I'm saying is that even sometimes counselors need support, and it's okay to recognize that, right? Styles and techniques are different. Okay, my time is up, unfortunately, but I hope you can have me back at some point. Okay, then I'll chat to you guys individually if you want to ask me something. Also, I hope you don't mind. Like Shuhaida said, we're going to be passing about pamphlets, and I've also got like a registration list. We need to give evidence-based statistics to the department. So if you don't mind, I just need some details from here if you can. Okay.
Well, on behalf of the ASRI colleagues, I would really like to say thank you very much and extend our gratitude for making time and to speak to us. And yeah, thank you very much.
So if anyone